Who would believe this? Sweden. They took in large numbers. They're having problems like they never thought possible.
There was just one little problem with what the president said, and I think this news clip sums it up.
We start this hour with an urgent plea from Sweden to the U.S. government asking, what is your president talking about?
You know, we really don't know what he is referring to, actually.
The embassy there also released a statement on the matter saying, quote, "We don't have any information regarding what President Trump was referring to in his speech, and we don't want to speculate. We have asked U.S. officials for an explanation."
Trump can dominate the news merely by referencing something that didn't happen in Sweden.
We can't really see any incident, any attacks worth mentioning.
As the world continues to try to deal with refugees from Iraq and Syria, Sweden has established itself as the most generous nation in Europe. It is unique, basically, in that it guarantees asylum to those who reach its borders.
Country of Sweden accepted about 275,000 refugees from 2014 to 16, more per capita than any other European country, vast majority coming from Muslim nations. Corresponding with that influx, a rise in sex and gun crimes, a big rise. In fact, according to a government survey, 1/3 of all Swedish women now say they no longer feel secure in their own neighborhoods.
There was an absolute surge in both gun violence and rape in Sweden once they began this open door policy.
Majority here are Muslims from East Africa, and they don't assimilate well into the Swedish culture and society, and they're unemployed, and they're poor.
Speaking to the women in particular, there's a much quieter story that's not being told, which is that women are frightened to go out. When I went to Rinkeby in the evening, I was the only female, certainly the only white female. And when I spoke to the ladies, it's because they're terrified of the crime, they're terrified of the gangs. And one particular lady I spoke to, she runs home at night because she's fearful of all the men that gather at night under the bridge where she lives, so they're kept indoors. So it's a really frightening place for a lot of women there particularly.
The crime statistics are the crime statistics, and they're not closely held. They're open to the public, and they do show this incredible surge of violence. What may actually be the problem is that they oftentimes try to cover up some of these crimes. That, for example, there's been a rash of these rapes, these music festivals, and what happens is they cover up as far as they could who the perpetrators were, or if actually rapes had actually occurred. Now, obviously, when you have so many people witnessing these rapes, they're difficult to do, and they've come out to the public. But I think that's kind of what they're referring to, that the government has gone out of its way to try to cover up some of these problems. Over the past 2 years, dozens of young women, some as young as 12, were raped at these festivals across Sweden by hundreds of young immigrants. They use the tactic where dozens of men surround one or more girls in circles. While the men in the inner circle sexually attacks their victims, the outer circle distracts and keeps out anyone who would stop it. The attacks have become so common that some bands, most notably Mumford & Sons, refuse to play in Sweden.
This has happened multiple times and to multiple victims. Then the issue is that when it is reported, this was widely known by the people who were there, the police that was on the scene, but then they put the lid on it. So they covered it up. They covered it up. So we didn't learn about this until much, much later.
There is a problem with socially deviant activity. There is a problem with crime. There is a problem with areas or hotspots of crime, be it in Malmö, be it in Gothenburg, Stockholm, or the suburbs thereof.
A country that has one of the highest number of reported rapes in the world. Hundreds of so-called exclusion areas. More than 55 no-go zones where police and ambulance get stoned.
These are areas that cops won't even enter because it's too dangerous for them. This is the policy of the National Police Authority in Sweden.
Sharia law is becoming more important than Swedish law.
Can you just say, this isn't working, or do people come down on you for saying something like that?
Oh, you can say it, but you're a racist. You're a xenophobe, right? You're Islamophobe.
Our media, as you know, worked feverishly to downplay any reports there might be a problem in Sweden. They're dishonest and politically motivated, so that wasn't surprising. What is surprising is how many Swedes are apparently afraid to say what they really think about what's happening there. Why is that?
Absolutely. There's this absolute belief, 80 years of liberal politicians, there's an absolute belief that Sweden is utopia, and that's the only message you can send. There's absolutely mandatory belief in multiculturalism, And there's an absolute reluctance to understand that when these individuals leave Eritrea, Somalia, Afghanistan, they don't just arrive in Sweden and then miraculously, join the multicultural dream. No, they bring every war, every fight, every hostility with them. And there in Rinkeby, in Sweden, you have the Eritreans who hate the Somalians, who hate the Afghanis, and that's just brought with them.
Well, in Sweden's own words, they consider themselves to be a humanitarian superpower, probably the only superpower that they would qualify for. So they feel that it's their moral duty to open their borders to all and any refugees that want to come to them.
We are unable in Sweden to socially integrate these people. It's not that they can't learn or go to school, but the Swedish politicians have had absolutely no systematic plan for integrating mass amounts of immigrants into become productive members of society.
So they live in these enclaves, which, by the way, are lovely. They're leafy neighborhoods. They're beautiful apartments, and they are sitting around. You're right. It's difficult to get jobs. There's too many of them, but they have tremendous benefits there, which is why so many of these migrants are going to Sweden to begin with.
Search the word asylum in Arabic on your smartphone, and Sweden pops up as a #1 result.
These things are not being openly and honestly discussed. The narrative in Sweden, the Swedish political debate, is completely false. You cannot have a debate, an honest, open debate in Sweden about immigration.
They won't acknowledge they've got a problem because that would mean admitting that everything they've believed in, multicultural ideas, are wrong, and that they shouldn't have let in 200,000 people in 2 years, and they're about to let in another 400,000 over the next 4 years. So this problem is not going away.
Even though the statistics were clear about who's the perpetrators, it doesn't make a difference. It's very socially unacceptable to make these kind of claims.
Every day last year, an average of 90 unaccompanied boys entered Sweden and only 8 girls in these refugees. So there were 90 guys for every 8 gals. And as a result, Swedish adolescents now have one of the worst sex imbalances of any population cohort ever recorded. You're familiar with China and its ruthlessly enforced one-child policy, where the government told parents they could only have 1 kid. So as a result, an entire generation of Chinese parents aborted all the girls or killed them outside the womb. And as a result, they now have a sex imbalance in that generation of 119 boys for every 100 girls. Sweden has caught up with that in the space of 2 years, simply by being the second most welcoming country of so-called refugees.
The type of benefits that immigrants receive in Sweden are significant and are all-encompassing, and include housing, food, education, and additional cash. Does the government give enough to the immigrants?
Yeah. Everything's enough. They give me a lot. They give me a house, room, clothes, my school.
All the Swedish government pays for it.
We are still following developing news. A truck has plowed into a crowd of people in Stockholm, Sweden.
We know that 4 people are now confirmed dead, and 15 are in hospital injured. 9 of these are said to be in critical condition.
The deadly truck attack in Sweden with all the hallmarks of terrorism.
Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven has said the country has been attacked and that everything indicates that this is an act of terrorism. Local police have so far arrested 1 person.
Judging by the social media presence of this person that is said to be held by the police, I think it's pretty safe to say that it's a question of Islamic terror.
You look at what's happening in Brussels. You look at what's happening all over the world. Take a look at Nice. Take a look at Paris. We've allowed thousands and thousands of people into our country, and there was no way to vet those people.
I heard several journalists and politicians who are in government today say that the way to combat terrorism is with love. And I would say that that is just not the case. The way to combat terrorism is with guns.
You've written that Sweden has become this unlikely source of jihadis from around the world because there's what you call a vacuum of values in Sweden. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, I mean, first of all, Sweden is, compared to its size, the third biggest contributor to global jihad today. We have a lot of young people who were actually born in this country, several hundreds of them, who have gone to Syria, among other countries, to fight global jihad. I believe that values is something that people need, even if we perhaps in these days and in this area of the world where I happen to be born, deny that nationalism matters, that borders matter, that national identity matters. But we've been in denial of that for a very long time. And where there is a vacuum, that vacuum needs to be and longs to be filled. And we've taken in hundreds of thousands of people who have a very strong identity, very strong national and religious identities, and they are filling that vacuum very quickly. And that is a very, very dangerous situation to be in.
And I think more and more people are realizing that this is it's not feasible to take so many immigrants during a so short time period.
Sweden's government is under political, economic and moral pressure.
The resources of the good ship Sweden are being stretched to the limit.
It's asked the EU for help.
We've been in a state of willful ignorance for quite some time. I mean, everyone knew that it was a question of when and not if, yet we seem unprepared.
The people here, they wonder if peace will ever come back to this place.
We can't really see any incident, any attacks worth mentioning. We really don't know what he is referring to, actually.